The story begins not in the chaos of scandal, but in the deceptive calm of a golden London morning. Buckingham Palace gleamed beneath the summer light, its stone walls holding secrets older than the empire itself. Inside, King Charles sat in his private study, spectacles low on his nose, a cup of Earl Grey cooling beside a stack of documents. For decades, this room had been his sanctuary, where he wrote letters to ministers, read speeches, and in quieter moments mourned the passing of his mother, Queen Elizabeth II. But that morning, his peace shattered with a turn of a single page. The folder came from Clarence house, labeled Legacy Relocation. It seemed routine: property reports, asset summaries, all the dull but necessary paperwork of monarchy. Until Charles noticed one signature repeated in confident black ink: approved, Camilla, Queen Consort. There was no co-signature from the sovereign, no royal seal, no record of discussion. His hand froze. The words on the page blurred as realization struck. Camilla had authorized the redistribution of his late mother's personal possessions, jewels, estates, priceless heirlooms, all earmarked for modernization initiatives. At first, Charles tried to rationalize it, perhaps a clerical misstep, but as he read further, the notes grew bolder, references to asset transfers, private management structures, even proposals for selective liquidation. It was not reform, it was control. The Queen Consort had reached into the sanctum of royal legacy itself, and she'd done it without him. He could almost hear his mother's voice, calm but unyielding, echoing through the years. "Charles, what we preserve defines who we are." The king leaned back, exhaling sharply. His chest tightened, not from age, but betrayal. For years, he had defended Camilla against storms of public judgment, believing their love had triumphed over scandal and scrutiny. Now, in one stroke of her pen, she'd fractured the fragile trust they had fought to rebuild. That night, Charles arrived unannounced at Clarence house, the warmth of its familiar drawing room fireplace glowing, soft music playing, did nothing to ease the weight in his chest. Camilla rose with her usual grace, smiling gently, as if she'd expected him for dinner, but when she saw the folder in his hand, her smile faltered. "Charles," she began softly, "you look tired. Sit down. I'll have them bring tea." He didn't move. "Camilla," he said quietly, voice shaking with restraint, "you approved the reallocation of my mother's estate without my consent, without even telling me." Her calm cracked for an instant, then returned in polished form. "I was trying to help," she said carefully. "You've been overwhelmed. I only wanted to modernize, make her legacy accessible, charitable causes, museums, the environment, everything you stand for." Charles's voice dropped lower, heavy and cold. "And the private accounts? The properties? The plans filed under your sister's name?" Camilla's lips parted, a flicker of panic crossing her face before she masked it again. "That's business logistics," she said too quickly. "You're misinterpreting." "Don't," he interrupted. "I've seen the papers. You went behind my back. You touched what my mother built." The silence that followed was suffocating. Even the fire seemed to dim. For years, Charles had forgiven public outrage, family conflict, endless gossip, all for the woman before him. But this was different. This was sacred ground violated. Finally, he spoke, barely above a whisper. "You've crossed a line, Camilla. One you can't uncross." He turned and left without another word. When the door closed, Camilla's composure shattered. Her hands trembled as she pressed them to her temples. She hadn't meant for it to spiral this way. What began as a quiet plan to secure her family's financial future, to prove she was more than a shadow behind the throne, had become an act of defiance she couldn't defend. Outside, the London night was silent, unaware that inside those gilded walls, a royal love story had begun to die. Clarence house had always been a refuge, a world of quiet halls, rose gardens, and the scent of polished wood. But within those serene walls, unease crept like smoke. In the days that followed, Camilla sat alone in her favorite sitting room, the one where sunlight filtered through lace curtains and dust motes shimmered like ghosts. She pretended to read, but her mind raced. Charles's voice still haunted her, the look of betrayal carved deep into his features. She told herself she had done nothing wrong, that modernization was the only way forward. Yet beneath the rationalizations, guilt gnawed at her. She wasn't alone in her secret. Her sister, Annabelle Elliott, had become her closest confidant, the quiet architect of what was meant to be a private legacy for their family. Annabelle was sharp, composed, and loyal to blood above all else. When she arrived that afternoon, dressed in muted tweed and carrying her usual air of sophistication, Camilla greeted her with weary relief. "They're starting to question everything," Camilla murmured, pouring tea into delicate china cups. "Charles looked at me as though I'd stolen from his soul." Annabelle's tone remained calm, pragmatic. "He's emotional, not logical. He'll come around once the dust settles. You've done what's necessary for the future. Elizabeth's legacy can't sit in vaults forever. You've given it purpose." Camilla's lips trembled into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Purpose," she repeated as if the word itself could absolve her. But the truth was harder to escape. The documents bore her signature. The funds had already begun to move through layers of private accounts, clean, discreet, and perfectly legal on paper. The plan was supposed to be invisible: convert select heirlooms, channel proceeds through a family trust, and invest in resort developments that would provide long-term wealth for the Parker Bowles line. Annabelle leaned forward, eyes sharp. "The transfers are progressing. Tom and Laura have already met with investors. Once this first phase clears, everything will stabilize. But you must hold your nerve, Camilla. Any sign of hesitation and the entire plan collapses." Camilla nodded slowly. She had fought too hard to retreat now. From the days of being the other woman to finally wearing the crown beside Charles, she had clawed her way into history. And yet, deep down, she feared she might have traded love for survival. That night, as rain drummed softly against the windows, an uninvited listener stood just beyond the drawing room door. Mary, a maid who had served under Queen Elizabeth II herself, paused mid-step, the sound of Camilla's hushed voice freezing her in place. Words drifted through the narrow crack. Phrases like sell, transfer, and private fund. Mary's heart pounded. She had spent years preserving the Queen's possessions, cleaning the very jewels now spoken of like bargaining chips. When the conversation ended, she fled the corridor, her conscience aflame. Loyalty to the crown had always been her compass, and now it demanded action. Clutching the small address book the late Queen had once given her, she found the number of someone who would understand the weight of what she'd heard. Princess Anne. Anne was in her private study at Windsor when the call came through. The princess's voice was brisk, practical as always, but when Mary's trembling confession poured through the receiver, something in her stilled. Camilla's name. Annabelle's plan. Resorts in Wiltshire and Scotland. The mention of selling royal heirlooms for personal profit. Anne's jaw tightened until her teeth ached. "Thank you, Mary," she said firmly. "You did the right thing." When the call ended, Anne didn't sit back down. She grabbed her coat, keys jingling sharply in her grip, and strode toward the door. The palace staff who caught her passing knew better than to speak. Her expression was carved from iron. By the time she reached Clarence's house, the rain had turned fierce. Without waiting for permission, she entered, her boots echoing through the marble foyer. When Camilla appeared at the top of the staircase, startled and pale, Anne's voice rose clear and cold through the air. "Enough secrets," she said. "We're going to talk about what you've done." The confrontation unfolded beneath the soft flicker of the chandeliers, a storm contained within polished walls. Camilla stood at the top of the staircase, frozen, her hand clutching the railing as Princess Anne advanced across the marble floor. The air felt heavy, the silence between them crackling with unspoken fury. Anne's gaze was sharp, unyielding, her voice low but cutting through the quiet like steel. "I know about the scheme," she said. "The sales, the transfers, the accounts in your sister's name. You've turned our mother's legacy into your family's business." Camilla's breath caught, her composure wavering for the first time. "Anne, you don't understand," she began, stepping down slowly. "This isn't what it looks like. I was protecting Charles, securing the future." "Stop lying," Anne snapped. "You did it for yourself, for Annabelle, Tom, and Lara. You've betrayed everything our mother stood for. The jewels, the estates, the heritage. None of it was yours to touch." For a heartbeat, Camilla's mask slipped. Her shoulders sagged, her voice soft but trembling with defiance. "You've never forgiven me, have you? Even after all these years?" I was never part of your world, not truly. No matter how much I tried, Elizabeth never wanted me at her table. You all made sure I knew it. Anne's tone softened, but her words carried no mercy. You earned your place beside Charles. You had everything: the crown, the love, the forgiveness of a nation. But greed has a way of consuming what grace gives. You've destroyed the trust that made you queen consort. Their words echoed through the house, reaching the ears of staff who lingered just out of sight. One of them made the quiet call to Buckingham Palace, reporting that Princess Anne had arrived unannounced. Within the hour, word reached the king. Charles didn't wait. He drove himself through the rain, the car slicing through the dark London streets like an arrow. His jaw was set, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. When he arrived, Clarence's house was tense, servants pale and silent. He found Anne in the hall, standing rigidly by the staircase. She met his eyes and simply said, "You need to see her." Camilla waited in the drawing room, the same room that once hosted their laughter, their whispered dreams of redemption. Now it was a courtroom. She stood when he entered, her voice breaking. "Charles, please?" But Charles's expression was unreadable, his tone calm yet edged with heartbreak. "I've seen the evidence. The accounts, the correspondence, the resort plans. You took what belonged to my mother and turned it into profit for your family. Why?" Tears welled in Camilla's eyes. "Because I was tired of being treated like a guest in your world," she said. "I built my life around you, gave up my peace, my reputation. I just wanted security for my family when you're gone. I didn't mean to dishonor her memory. I only wanted to belong." Charles's face tightened. "You belonged the moment I married," he said softly, "but you never believed it, did you? And now you've proven every critic right." He turned away, struggling to steady his voice. "There will be an emergency council tonight. Anne, William, and I will decide what happens next. Until then, you're to remain here." That evening, under the glow of Buckingham Palace chandeliers, the royal family gathered and laid the evidence before the king. William sat silently beside her, his face grave. Camilla entered last, her footsteps slow, the weight of the room pressing down on her. Charles stood at the head of the table. His decision was final, his words calm but irrevocable. "You will retain your title," he said, "but your duties end tonight. You'll live at Highgrove, privately, away from royal affairs. The monarchy will not fall to greed." Camilla broke down, sobbing openly, but there was no comfort left to give. The man who once defied the world for her now turned away. Weeks later, Clarence's house was quiet again. Camilla's portrait was removed from the palace gallery. She lived in solitude, surrounded by roses Charles once planted for her. The Parker Bowles fortune crumbled under investigation, and the empire she tried to build slipped into dust. At Windsor, Charles visited his mother's resting place. Kneeling by the marble tomb, he whispered, "It's done, Mummy. I've kept your promise." Outside, the bells of St. George's rang softly, mournful, dignified, and eternal. The crown had survived another storm, but the cost was love itself.